I'm Rabbi Shalom Bochner, and the sounding of the shofar, traditionally a ram's horn, is both one of the oldest symbols and sounds of our faith, but also begins to tell our history. Judaism dates from the time of Abraham and Sarah, who lived about 3,800 years ago. We're very much also the religion of the 5 books of Moses, who lived closer to 3,400 years ago. And we're very much also the religion of the rabbis, the rabbinic period, which begins as an oral tradition from the time of Moses and later gets written down 2,000 years ago, with literally commentary on commentary occurring ever since then. It is Abraham, symbol of not only the origins of Judaism, but of hospitality, who introduced the shofar to Judaism when he offered a ram in place of his son as an offering to God. The basic tenets of Judaism are both very easy to describe and quite complicated. The basic idea is we believe in a God of oneness. We are the world's oldest monotheistic faith, and not only a God that is one, but a universe that is part of that oneness. So in fact, according to our beliefs, every person, every place, every time, every object is part of God's oneness. We're both within God and God is within us. We are a religion that resists having a written creed or being reduced to a simple phrase, and yet there is a 6-word phrase that is very much the heart of our beliefs and our prayer services, and that's the 6 words of the Torah, known as the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, O Israel, listen those who face or wrestle with God. God is our God, God is oneness. And for thousands of years, every morning and every evening, Jews have recited those words, and they do form a significant part of our prayer services and our meditations. So on one hand, it's a very simple idea that God is oneness. On the other hand, the Torah explains that there are 613 mitzvot, which can be translated as commandments or instructions or connections, and that the role of the Jew is to fulfill each of these mitzvot. There are 365 things we're not supposed to do, 248 things we are supposed to do. And often when I mention the idea of commandments, people say, oh, the 10 commandments. And yes, the 10 commandments are part of the 613 mitzvot, but there are 603 other times the Torah says to do something or not do something. And those divine instructions and connections and commandments, as explained by Jewish tradition through the writings of the Hebrew Bible and the rabbis, is very much the heart of Judaism. Among these beliefs and these expectations is the idea that we are to engage in tikkun olam, repairing the world, fixing the world, making the world a better place for everybody. These commandments also include how we observe our holidays, our dietary laws, and the vast majority of them speak to the idea of Judaism as a culture, an ethnicity, not just a religion. In other words, it is possible for one to be an atheist Jew or an agnostic Jew or a proud secular or cultural Jew, because we're not just a religion, we're an extended family, we're an extended culture, a civilization. And so Jewish music and art and food and entertainment and comedy are all part of this kind of ethos of Judaism that includes, for example, how we pay our workers, how we treat the world, how we treat each other, how we treat the people that we don't always get along with. And while all of that comes down to oneness, it's an incredibly detailed and beautiful faith. Keep in mind that the main description of these laws and these rules and teachings in history is in the Torah. So this is a Torah scroll, a handwritten book of the 5 books of Moses, the first section of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. And this particular scroll has an interesting story. It's a couple hundred years old and most likely arrived in California as part of the gold rush. We know that because of some particulars as to the way the Torah is sewn, that this Torah came from Prussia, today Germany, which is where most of the Jews that came to the gold rush were leaving from. And we also have an indication of its age. So this scroll is probably from the early 1800s and arrived in California along with the gold rush. Torah scrolls are read with what's called a yad, a pointer finger, And that's to show respect to the text. We don't want to use our fingers to touch it. We don't want any dirt or oil from our fingers impacting the scroll. So when it is time for the Torah to be chanted from, the reader comes up, blessings are said by the congregation at the Torah, and then while holding on to the handles, what's called an atzei chayim, trees of life, the Torah is read. And you'll notice where I'm pointing and moving, the Torah is read from right to left. This particular section is quite significant. It's known as the Song at the Sea. This is the song that Moses and Miriam recite when the people are delivered, and some say it is written in this unique way to look like a wall of waves. The Torah is not read, it is sung, and this particular section has a number of unique melodies, including this one. Az Yasher Moshe uvenei Yisrael et hashira hazot ladonai vayomru lemor. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song, which was sung to God, and they sang and said thusly. Just a few columns after this song of crossing the sea, we have a very significant portion of the text, which is right here, what in Hebrew we call the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements, better known by many as the 10 Commandments. And for example, where it says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat le'kodsho, Sheshet Yamim Tavod Vasita, Kol Melachtecha, Ve'yom HaShavi, Shabbat Ladonai. Remember the Shabbat day to make it holy. 6 days, do all of your work, but the 7th day is a day of rest, a Shabbat for Adonai. It takes us an entire year to read through a Torah. A Torah, when unrolled, is the length of a football field. It is written by hand with a feather pen, exactly has been done for thousands of years without any modern technology involved. And simply reading a Torah takes, as I said, as a community, a year. Understanding it and going into all of its detailed levels of interpretation. What does it mean literally? What does it mean morally? What does it mean in terms of backstory? What does it mean spiritually, mystically? That's the path of a lifetime. So that's why I explained that Judaism has a simple concept of a greater oneness that we're all a part of, but the application of that relies on 613 instructions. Finally, I'll conclude by explaining that according to Judaism, the Jews are expected to follow the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. That is not an expectation we have for the rest of the world. The Torah explains 7 instructions to Noah, and those are understood as the Noahide laws, which all are to live by. Things like not eating a living animal, setting up a system of courts and justice. Basically, being a decent person, not engaging in murder or theft. Judaism is a non-proselytizing faith. We do not believe the whole world needs to be Jewish. We hope the whole world will join us in a righteousness of respecting each other, which includes our desire to fulfill the 613 mitzvot that elevate the world. We take the physical world and we reveal its spiritual and mystical essence. So I've been asked to speak about some of the duties of daily life and the holidays within Judaism. As I mentioned, the 613 mitzvot, which is a word that can be translated as commandment or instruction, teaching or connection, very much are the foundation of Jewish life and how it is lived by millions of Jews all around the world today. The mitzvot govern everything from what we eat, how we treat each other, the holidays. It certainly contains the basic ideas of Jewish religious life, but it really moves beyond religious life to include agricultural and commercial concerns with how do we live with an awareness of God's oneness in everything that we do. Not only when we're praying as a community or observing a holiday, but how do we bring oneness and awareness of godliness into our daily life. Judaism believes that there are 3 daily prayer services when a new day begins after sunset, in the morning when the sun is rising, and then in the afternoon. On Shabbat and holidays, we had a 4th service around noon, and on Yom Kippur, our holiest day of the year, the day of cleansing and atonement and spiritual renewal, we had a 5th prayer service right as the sun is setting for a total of 5 services. These services include meditations with sections from the Torah, also known as the Hebrew Bible, and prayers written by the rabbis, with a great deal of material drawn from the Psalms of King David, the 150 Psalms, the songs and poems of King David, as recited in Hebrew and sung in Hebrew, form a significant part of our services as well. We have many different holidays. The most significant is Shabbat. It begins every Friday evening a few minutes before sunset and concludes when stars come out on Saturday night. And it is 25 hours dedicated to being rather than doing. So for 6 days we are to work the world. On the seventh day of the week, we are to simply appreciate it as it is. So human being as compared to human doing. It is marked in addition to restful time, time in the community, time in the family, joyful meals where people linger and sing and engage in words of Torah and words of connection. Beyond our daily Shabbat service or Sabbath gatherings, one of our most significant holidays is Yom Kippur, the day of cleansing, which occurs in the fall. It is preceded a week earlier by Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. There are also 3 pilgrimage festivals when people would make an actual pilgrimage to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem before it was destroyed by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago. And that is Passover, representing the people's birth. 7 weeks later, the holiday of Shavuot, the festival of weeks and first fruits, which commemorates not only the beginning of summer, but also the receiving of Torah, the receiving of revelation and the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. And 6 months after Passover, we have the joyful holiday of Sukkot that falls also in the fall, which is a holiday of Thanksgiving and harvest celebration. We have a lot of other holidays. Every new moon is a Rosh Chodesh, a period of new beginning. We have Hanukkah, celebrating light over darkness in the winter. It's a minor holiday, but a joyful one. We have Purim in the late winter, based on the biblical book of Esther, and literally dozens of other minor holidays, feast days, and fast days that I would not be able to pack into a short presentation. The origin of so much of this information is in the Torah. And the amazing thing about a Torah scroll is not only that it is written by hand with a feather pen on stretched parchment in a way that Torahs have been made for thousands of years. The really amazing thing is that every Torah scroll everywhere in the world is identical. There's no such thing as a Reform scroll, an Orthodox scroll, a conservative scroll. All of them are literally letter for letter exactly the same, and they form the main foundation of Judaism. Through reading this, and actually more accurately chanting this once a week, we learn not only what is the revealed tradition of our people, but how it has been understood and taught and explained by the rabbis for thousands of years. So one of the highlights of a Jewish community is to gather every Shabbat morning, every Saturday morning, and read a weekly portion. Every synagogue everywhere in the world is reading the same weekly portion, starting with the fall with Genesis, concluding the following fall with Deuteronomy, and then the scroll is literally rolled back to the beginning and started over again. I've also been asked to say a little bit about the role of women in Judaism. Judaism believes that all people, men and women, Jewish and non-Jewish, are made in the image of God. We are born pure and holy. When we make mistakes, which we inevitably do, we need to engage in a process of teshuvah, spiritual return, which is a path available to anyone who wants to learn from their mistakes and move forward. So men and women are equally holy, and in fact, there are a number of teachings that explain that Sarah, the wife of Abraham, was on a higher level of prophecy than her husband. And that's an important reminder for men everywhere. The Torah says to Abraham, God said, listen to your wife. And that is probably good advice for men all around the world. Traditionally, men and women have played different roles in the Jewish community. Women being responsible for the household, the finances, the education, often the livelihood of the family. Men being more involved with the affairs of the community community and public leadership. But we are reaching a time that many congregations have an egalitarian approach where men and women may be rabbis and certainly active participants in the congregation. While in Orthodoxy, women are not serving as rabbis, they certainly can serve as teachers and as leaders of the community. And there are many prominent women mentioned in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, such as the matriarchs Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, Miriam, the older sister of Moses, and many stories in the rest of the Hebrew Bible, Ruth and Esther and Hannah, and literally I could stand here and list significant women for the rest of this discussion. So that's a little bit about the role of women. And finally, I'll conclude by explaining that our congregation is the only Jewish congregation in the greater area. We're the only synagogue with a building and a rabbi between Stockton and Fresno. And that's not too surprising. We're only 0.2% of the world's population, so there's not a lot of us. Our particular congregation here, Congregation Beth Shalom, is affiliated with the conservative movement, which is more traditional than Reform, but less adhering to all the traditions as Orthodoxy. But we very much function as a pluralistic center for Judaism. So people are traditional, less traditional, Orthodox, Reform, secular, agnostic. They're all welcome to our gatherings, as, by the way, is the larger public. We gladly welcome guests and visitors and students to join us. So that's a little bit of insight about Judaism. Thanks so much for listening.